This is CinePunked. This episode, Targets. The summer of 1968. The high-profile assassinations of activist Martin Luther King Jr. and politician Robert F. Kennedy served as a backdrop to the release of the latest low-budget thriller produced by King of the Bee Pictures, Roger Corman. Targets was the debut feature from critic turned filmmaker 28-year-old Peter Bogdanovich. Made in 2 weeks, it brought together the old-world cinematic gothic horror in the form of Boris Karloff, alongside contemporary fears in the form of Tim O'Kelly's gun-wielding Vietnam vet. The result was a provocative and explosive drama that resonates even today. Hello, I'm your host Robert J. E. Simpson, and joining me on this edition of the CinePunked podcast are my dear friends and colleagues, Dr. Rachel Kelly.
Hello.
And Ben Simpson.
Hello.
So I just want to say at the off that Targets has been on my list for this show ever since we began recording, and it's unashamedly one of my favourite pictures, and I've long fancied putting this on as a drive-in movie for reasons which I suspect we might get round to discussing. But at the time of recording, this is early January 2022, and we're doing the show today to mark the passing just last week of the film's director Peter Bogdanovich at the age of 82. An unfortunate timing for us to have a look at what is, I think, a great film, but I mean, I'm interested to see where this conversation goes and what you made of it, not least because, as I say, I am a bit of a fan. Yeah, any thoughts to start us off?
Well, you've made us watch a lot of weird stuff, Robert, let's be honest. This was pretty spectacular. I mean, I'm not going to say that, you come up with obscure film titles I've never heard of and I go, because I really don't. I go, oh, I haven't heard of that. I probably should have. But very often I then sit down and watch them like, this tells me more about Robert's psyche than I care to know, I think. I mean, there was that weird James Bond thing that you got us to watch. That was fun. But this was just, I started watching it and immediately I was just like, why have I not seen this film before? This is brilliant. Just from the very openings. I mean, this is a film. This is pure Hollywood new wave. It's an absolutely gloriously, unashamedly Hollywood new wave. I have seen so many films, novo director, sort of extravaganza, and it's just fabulous. I loved it.
I mean, I'm shocked that I've got a thumbs up from Rachel from the off. This is not a. I mean, it's as well we record these things for posterity because nobody would ever believe it if I told them.
Rest on your laurels because it'll not happen again.
Ben, I'm interested in your kind of gut response to this one.
At the start, I was like, what is this? This is weird. And then it develops, and then I'm like, oh, okay, right, okay, interesting. And then it develops even more, and I'm like, all right, okay, what's the motive other than you're a psycho? You never really get down to that other than him trying to have a conversation with his wife and her obviously being late for work. It just kind of brushes him off. It's a bit weird. Kind of cool.
A typical American family at dinner. Mom and Dad, their beautiful daughter-in-law, and their only son, Joe, a homicidal maniac.
Harry! What are you doing?
How's your dad? It's okay.
Here you go.
Thanks a lot.
What you hung this time?
I'm gonna shoot some pigs.
Targets, a movie about a war inside a man's head.
Hey, what are you doing?
Peter Bogdanovich, the director of The Last Picture Show, takes you for a roller coaster ride through the canyons of a disturbed mind in Targets.
doing out here? Open the window. Roll your window down. There's a sniper in here. There's someone going up there.
What turns an all-American boy into an all-American killer?
That's sort of one of the things I loved about it, though. I suppose you're just kind of post Hays Code Hollywood. So whenever you have somebody doing something unspeakable, Hollywood's had these codes that sort of say, well, we do have to make sure that he always gets his comeuppance, and that it's completely inexplicable, and it's not just your evil just exists, and there's not much you can do about it, guys. So this is pure. This guy just snapped, and
What was the
that's
reason,
what we're
though?
doing.
So
Well, I think Vietnam vet.
that's what I keep on reading. Although
Is he a Vietnam vet, or was it
Apparently
not his
so.
dad?
You see him in his uniform. I know.
Was that
I
not his
totally,
dad?
No, I know. It took me a minute as well. I can't quite remember when that clicked for me, but yeah, that's him.
I've seen this film multiple times and it still doesn't click for me. It's only that I've read it half a dozen times this week that he's a Vietnam vet, that it registers that he's a Vietnam vet. Honestly, it's never registered before. I just thought he was pure psychopath, but it does add a different kind of connotation onto it, because
It's part of that whole counterculture thing. It's part of that whole protest, that sort of scream of rage,
well, I mean, I think
and it's early for it.
we would. I mean, nowadays, if you were to shoot this film today, and I think that. I'm assuming that if you've listened to, I mean, I'm not having to preface every pod with this. I'm assuming that you've seen the film before you get into this, because there are going to be spoilers ahead. All right. I mean, what we've just said to you is pretty much what you'll get in the advertising for the film. So there's not a great revelatory spoiler in that. But I recommend you watch the film before you kind of continue with this. But from this point on, there's likely to be spoilers ahead. I think if we were doing this film today, and I think it stands in such a way that it could easily be remade without very many changes at all, and probably still have just as much potency. I think the fundamental messages and stuff are sadly far too relevant still.
Well,
but
Bogdanovich said that himself. I mean, not that long ago. He
so that
basically said,
in 2012, after Columbine. It wasn't after Columbine. It was after something else.
Aurora. That'd be
Aurora.
Aurora.
He said that he was ashamed that he ever kind of made this film because of its violence. But I mean, that is a man who's considerably older, kind of reflecting back on something. I don't think this is a film that glorifies violence at
Definitely
all.
It's a tragedy.
It's horrible, but I mean, if we were to look at his character today, at the young fella who the protagonist or the antagonist in this, we would probably say he was suffering from PTSD. This is the aftermath of being at war, and it's affected him in such a way. Whereas, you look at this in the era of 1968, and it's just a different film. Now, it was shot in 1967. So shot in 1967 as part of a deal with Roger Corman, who basically put 125 grand into it, and said your only stipulation is that you have to use some footage from my film The Terror with Boris Karloff. So it's an old Victorian film. You also see a bit of Jack Nicholson in this. He's in The Terror, and then Karloff owes me 2 days of filming. So you got Karloff for 2 days. You got to use a bit of stock footage from my other film, and then just do whatever you want. And that's how the film basically came about.
It's just so classically Corman school of filmmaking, isn't it? Just like, here's some money, do the thing, okay? And you've got these random parameters that you have to meet, but go and make things. And you go off and you make something incredible.
Well, all he cared about was making his money back. I mean, he wasn't massively worried about it being great pieces of art, but it means that when you watch Roger Corman's films, is that you have some stuff that is complete dirge. It's horrible, it's unbearable, it's exploitational, but then you've got these moments of pure brilliance. I love
Piranha one of his, wasn't that? Was that just random James Cameron early filmmaking stuff? I think Piranha might have been one of his.
I think it probably was.
Sounds like him.
I mean, Ben, I don't know how conscious you are about Roger Corman, but he ends up providing starts in the show business for people like Francis Ford Coppola, for Joe Dante, who did Gremlins, for James Cameron, who does Titanic and Aliens and Avatar and stuff like this. I mean, everybody who was a filmmaker in America in the 1970s and 80s started work for Roger Corman on really low budget pictures, but he believed in people. Roger Corman used to have a studio here in Ireland, and churned out stuff.
I don't think I knew that.
Yeah,
Uh,
I remember hearing that and really wanting to go and meet him, and I never managed to arrange anything.
wow.
I did get to. I mean, I have interviewed him. We have it up on our website, in fact, these days. For another thing, but I mean, so he offered these great chances, and Bogdanovich, who himself had been a film critic before he started making films, then gets this opportunity. He's done a couple of bits on films and produces this really interesting and very distinctive first feature that I think any of us should be proud of. I mean, we've talked before about Orson Welles a lot. Orson Welles is this great kind of like ingenue, this great young fella who has these great visions, and I think Bogdanovich had all the same potential. This is a man who had a very distinctive kind of filmmaking.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's very telling the fact that, you know, he's kind of partially responsible for Orson Welles being regarded as an auteur director these days, and basically responsible for kind of looking after Orson Welles at various parts of Orson Welles' life when things were not necessarily going so terribly well for Orson Welles.
No, I mean they were friends. They worked together. I've got his book somewhere of Bogdanovich interviewing Welles. I mean, like, they were buddies. Sorry, Ben, everything's going to have to come back down to Orson Welles at some point. You know this by now. But it's not even just that. I mean, the people who were involved in this in terms of filmic point of view, Sam Fuller, who's another one of those great sort of American independent film directors, ends up doing a script rewrite on this.
Uncredited.
And uncredited. And you've got Howard Hawks, who we have not done a Howard Hawks film on this yet. At some point we should do.
Yeah, we should.
Howard Hawks is another one of those great Hollywood film directors. He did westerns. He did proper, did other kind of more mainstream films. But he's also another one of those greats. And these are people that Bogdanovich was able to just call up and get them to do stuff for him. They were his friends. I mean, he sort of circled in this elite, which gives him an advantage that another filmmaker at the time wouldn't have. You know, when you've got the best people in the business that are helping you to polish your script, to maybe give you a favor. I mean, Sam Fuller's advice to him was that save your budget for the final reel. You know, so that bit where they do the shootout on top of the sort of the oil tanks. That was done for no money very early on. Karloff was used very sparingly. They did the shoot on top of by the freeway in 2 days. Like, that whole sequence is 2 days of filming.
That's 2 days of filming.
Yeah, all of Karloff's scenes were shot in 2 days.
It's so Corman.
there's 20 minutes of Karloff in this that he shot over 2 days. Roger Corman just says, like, shoot 10 minutes a day with him. Most films at this time are shooting like 3 minutes a day is a typical average.
There's this story about Roger Corman that I love, and I tell it whenever I teach Hollywood New Wave, about how he had a set. I'm not going to be able to remember the details when I don't have my notes in front of me, but he has a set for another 3 days. He's built the set for a film. He's finished shooting the film ahead of schedule. He's got the set for another 3 days. He's like, I bloody well paid for this set. Somebody write me a movie and we'll film it. And he bloody does. They film a movie in 3 days just because he wants to get the use out of the set, because he's paid for it and he has it for 3 more days. It's just wonderful. It's and that's when you get strokes of genius. That's also when you get absolute crap, but you get strokes of genius that way as well. And I really think Targets is a stroke of genius. I mean, Bogdanovich is not a director. I mean, I know his reputation. I know his sort of the body of work. I haven't seen a lot of his stuff. I'd forgotten Mask was one of his, actually, which I have seen.
I've not seen that one now, to be fair.
Have you not? Cher is marvelous.
I'm going through a Bogdanovich kick at the moment, so and I'm loving what I'm seeing. But I mean, his way of doing this was really economical. I mean, that stuff they shot with three-way. I was watching a thing about it yesterday. I mean, they had no permission to do any of that stuff. You're not allowed to shoot on the freeway in the US.
That's brilliant.
And they went and staged like car crashes and everything. It's like, this is guerrilla.
That's nuts.
It's guerrilla filmmaking. I'm watching that stuff going like, how did they get permission? How do other people not see someone driving off the road and stop and try and help? Like, he does that.
Sure, that woman that like tries to wave somebody down and then she gets shot in the back.
Luckily, it's LA and nobody's going to stop,
Yeah, so they did that stuff in about 2 days. The whole sequence that they did at the end in the theater took them a week. Like they kind of, it's so. I mean, it's brilliantly economic. But that was the advice that Sam Fuller gave him, was to kind of like save your money, use it at the end, have a nice explosive kind of big finale, which is pretty decent advice.
Yeah, and I mean that's the sort of thing that is it's confidence that builds the ability to make those decisions. So having somebody at that kind of formative stage who's able to say, no, actually your instinct is going to tell you to do this, but do this instead.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you end up with a film like that.
It is a good wee story. It's a good wee story.
Yeah.
It's very interesting how it develops. As you said, like I think if you reshot that thing nowadays, like you wouldn't need to change much at all.
No, I wouldn't have thought.
Like, can you think of anything you would change in it, really?
I think you'd have hard time getting the same resonance with the old guard of the horror cinema making way for the new horrors of the sort of the mid to late 20th century, because that flows out of a very specific moment. And God, Karloff is amazing. I know him from virtually nothing. I know him from Frankenstein, like everybody does. And then just seeing that very gentle, softly spoken Englishman, just sort of he lights up the screen.
Byron?
You didn't say goodbye.
Stop it, Sammy. Don't be his errand boy. It nauseates
I
me.
didn't come out here because...
I know you came out to save your own little opus.
Well, that's true. Because without you, there's no picture.
Rubbish. Anybody can walk through the special effects for you.
It's not that kind of picture. And there's nobody else for it. The part is you.
Sammy, you're a sweet boy, but you
I'm not
can't
trying to be.
possibly understand what it feels like to be me. I'm an antique, out of date.
All right, what are you going to do? Plant roses? Actors don't retire. About 6 months and you'll blow your brains out,
I'm
Byron.
an anachronism.
What does that mean?
Sammy, look around you. The world belongs to the young. Make way for them. Let them have it.
I think that, I mean, for me, that the way the two stories are woven together is masterful. And I think that's a very specific historical moment. I think you would have to, I mean, unless you wanted to set it in that historical moment, I think you would then have to work out how you're going to have that same kind of resonance between the old guard handing over to the new guard in a modern context.
I mean, I suppose you probably wouldn't have that, but the element about like when you look at this is a mass shooting. And this is at a time when mass shootings in America seem slightly rarer than they are today, where, there's barely a fortnight goes by where you don't read about another one.
But for me, that's where a lot of that kind of emotional heft comes from, is that it's discussing the new horror. And I mean, this is a horror that's going to sear itself deeply into the American psyche. I mean, it is just going to become the specter of gun violence, which, of course, it's not necessarily a new thing, but the idea of the mass massacres with guns and is something that kind of is just becoming a thing. I think they referenced the 1966 massacre as part of the inspiration for this story. But you are also feeding into this insanely destructive war that's bringing young men home in body bags or missing limbs and profoundly disturbed by what they've seen, and sort of then kind of generating this next wave of generational trauma, which is going to feed into this horror. So for me, I think that is where a lot of that heft is coming from. And I mean, I just watching this, this is like a masterclass in kind of emotional and narrative nuance. The way those two stories are being sort of collided, and how they feed into each other and reinforce each other and underline the messages of both stories, which on the one hand seem completely disparate, but I was captivated, I was spellbound, I was kind of blown away by the care and the construction of this, and then just discover that actually it was just because Karloff was owed Corman a couple of days. That's why it happened. But surely not. Surely this was the work of months of careful thinking. No, had to use Karloff, decided to use Karloff like this and go.
That's why I love Corman, and it's also. I mean, I think there's a thing where you can learn a lot about filmmaking and about how a good film comes together by watching some of what goes on with Corman. Is that it's not something that takes, it doesn't take years to make a feature film. I mean, he could churn them out in as you've said, he'd turn them out in a few days. He was quite happy to do that, and to turn out decent films in a few days.
This is
Maybe
what
not.
happens when imposter syndrome doesn't exist. Like, no, I make films. This is what I do. Here's another one. Here's one I did 5 minutes ago.
Well, I think you just know. I mean, he has elements that he wants to include in them, and as long as you get those elements and hit those beats, it's like people who churn out soap operas every day. I mean, they're able to do it because they know what's expected of them. It shouldn't be rocket science. And yet Bogdanovich doesn't just do a painting by numbers. I mean, he actually produces something that's quite provocative and quite original and quite thoughtful. Now, the BFI are releasing this in the summer of 2022 on Blu-ray finally in the UK. So I mean, it's going to get, I imagine, in the months after this podcast is recorded and goes up, the film will probably get a bit more attention and will probably get a bit more of an audience. It's sad that Bogdanovich isn't going to be around to see it, but I think he was aware of the respect and admiration that people had for this film and for his stuff generally. Are you aware much about Karloff, Ben?
No.
Not at all.
No. You're like saying names here. I'm like, who the heck are you talking about?
This is why we have Ben on.
Yeah.
No, if you saw
keeps us-
him, a couple
keeps
of
us
bolts in
grounded.
his neck and a scar across his forehead.
So
Oh,
Boris
right.
Karloff, or to give him his birth name, actually his always his name because he never legally changed it. He's William Henry Pratt, born in 1887, I believe it was, in to an English Indian family, which is why he has that really dark complexion. So he's the most English of men, but he's also from that kind of sort of mixed heritage. But he was a British actor that went off to America, started making films in the silent era, and then his rise to stardom. Well, there is a Hard Hawks film
The criminal code.
that is featured in the middle of this that he was in.
I saw this at the Museum of Modern Art.
Smith's right. I am a museum piece.
Howard Hawks directed this.
I know. Yeah. Thanks to him, it was my first really important part.
But most people will know him from his work for the Universal horror movies. So he was the original big screen Frankenstein's monster.
Right,
He
okay.
was just billed as Karloff in that film. So it's an assumed name, but that is nonetheless how he was recognised. And then he made lots more. And by 1967, when this film is made, he essentially has come back to England. He's come back home. I mean, when they talk about Baron Orlok coming home to England, he's always talking about Karloff was doing that. He lived in a little village called Bramshot in England, in a house called Roundabout. Basically, the road goes round the house. It's kind of a weird, lovely little place. And strange coincidence, Ben. Mum will tell you about going to visit Karloff's house. She remembers it from her youth because I think it was cousins of hers lived there, and Granny and Granda lived just up the road at one point.
Seriously, that's so cool.
I know. So I've always known about the house before I ever kind of like was consciously aware about who Boris Karloff was. But Karloff himself was he was a great British actor. I mean, at this point, he's very ill as well. I mean, you see him at points in this where you can see his bowed leg. Like, his leg is just like not straight. He's carrying an oxygen cylinder around with him between takes because he's struggling to breathe. His part of a lung is all that's working. He's emphysema. He's suffering from all sorts of injuries. He is the grand old man of horror, but he is still churning out these films.
Fair play to him.
I mean, for a work ethic, it's astounding. This, and there's another film he did with a young British director called Michael Reeves, a film called The Sorcerers. And I think those two films were shot around the same time, and they're just brilliant final pieces of work from this man. He did another few films in Mexico, which are atrocious, but for kind of like an end of career thing. Now, hopefully, then when you think about that and when you think about his history within horror, when you see his character on screen, it takes on a new resonance. Like he's sort of playing himself.
Yeah.
The films you see are Boris Karloff films.
Yeah.
that
I
that,
noticed that.
that did go out into cinemas. I mean, these aren't just things that he specially shot or it's not been cobbled together. It's not like a Forrest Gump where they've stuck Boris Karloff in the middle of somebody else's film. It's like this was a Boris Karloff film called The Terror, that he shot for Roger Corman, except now he's Baron Orlok, which is a nice little nod to Nosferatu.
Nosferatu, yeah.
Ben's like, what?
It's just so new wave, whether you want to call it, French new wave or Hollywood new wave. It is so new wave. It's so referential. It's so deeply embedded in sort of a reverence for past films and that kind of playful mixing of old and new, and the little kind of Easter eggs for fans, like Orlok, remember Orlok, Nosferatu, Orlok, and it's just the delight. And that's you're either going to love this or you're not going to love it, I think. And I love it because, being a film nerd as well, I kind of delight in the little references that are just there for the people who have seen lots and lots of movies. And it's, which is kind of, it's the sort of the Hollywood new wave kind of just pleasing themselves and just going, ha 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 ha, look, we've seen lots of films. You've seen films too, haven't you? Here's a little reference to a little film you've probably seen.
Can you very, very briefly explain Hollywood New Wave to Ben? Because I realise this is not a term that he'll have come across very often, and you've mentioned it a few times.
Yeah.
So it has its roots in France. So it was a French Nouvelle Vague. French New Wave is a group of film theorists turned film directors who start making their own movies because they want to make the kind of films that they want to see, and they are sort of disrupting the kind of the established cinema of the time, but they're also people who've seen loads and loads of movies, and they've taught themselves movies by watching lots of movies and talking about movies. So when they start making films, it's just peppered with little references to the films that they've fallen in love with. Like Godard is a massive Hitchcock fan, and Breathless, the film that, if you've seen any French New Wave, you've seen Breathless.
Right, the souffle.
Yeah, the souffle one. It's got lots of little references to Hitchcock. As Chabrol also has like sort of shot by shot remakes in films that have nothing to do with Hitchcock, but so then it kind of gets transported to Hollywood via writings and via sort of other sort of up and coming directors and people who are interested in film in Hollywood. They kind of take this mentality, and there is a big revolution going on in film anyway, because film has in Hollywood has become very much fixated on widescreen and spectacle and just chucking loads of money at the screen, and that's sort of diminishing returns. So Hollywood's aware that there's an issue, and it's aware that they have to kind of meet a new audience, and New Wave is how they do it, and it's by kind of using these new directors, this new blood that's come up, that's for the first time actually studied film as an academic discipline and learned how to make films in a university or a college setting, as opposed to, you got apprenticed. Sorry, yeah, just winging it. Basically, you got apprenticed to the studio, and you sort of started off by getting coffees for everybody, and then maybe you got to change the camera reels, and then if you were very, very good, maybe you got to be script supervisor, and up you worked until you were director. These guys have studied how to do it, so that's why they're coming in with their fancy camera angles, like, aha, I know what would work here. We'll have chiaroscuro lighting to represent blah. But as opposed to, the directors going, we can't afford to light this properly, so we'll have chiaroscuro lighting. So it's this new breed of directors, young, passionate, informed, educated film lovers who start making films, and the kind of films they're making are violent. They have got sex in them, they've got nudity in them, they're countercultural, they're taboo pushing. So you got The Graduate is one of them. Somebody seduces his girlfriend's ma, and you've got Bonnie and Clyde, where they go out and kill people, and they're killing the establishment basically.
I can see Ben getting very worried now. It's like, if he responds in the wrong way to any of these titles, he knows they're going to end up on our list, and he have to watch them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really want to do The Graduate, but I do Bonnie and Clyde. That's an interesting one.
So that hopefully gives you a bit more of a kind of sense about what's going on. because I think it's
Yeah.
important and for anyone who's listening to this who isn't familiar with the terms or isn't familiar with the directors, the names, like that's okay, because we all have to like find it from somewhere, and it's very easy for us to assume that people know stuff. So thanks for the explanation, Rachel, because I think you probably explained it better than I would have.
No, thank you.
I used to teach this stuff, so
I mean,
to students who thought that Star Wars was an old movie.
There are similar movements that happen, you know, in Britain as well, and you know, the stuff that happens in Italy. I mean, so like there's a lot of cinema makers are kind of, there's a change that's happening in film, but the Hollywood stuff is still going on. You're still getting all those big budget things, but there are these other sort of people like Peter Bogdanovich, who is doing something that's very different from everything else you're getting.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, that's we've talked a little bit about Karloff. There's a couple other things I think that we have to talk about in this pod when we're talking about these films. I mean, Karloff I think is brilliant and someone I loved, and according to my Letterboxd review of last year, he's the actor I watched most in films last year.
That doesn't surprise me in the slightest.
It surprised me
It was
slightly.
him or Vincent Price.
I didn't think I'd watched that many Karloff films, but apparently I did. But I mean, obviously, the story itself is based in part on the story of Charles Whitman, who was known as the Texas Tower Sniper, and in 1966, he killed his mum and his wife by knife. Then he went to the University of Texas at Austin and began killing people, shooting. What was it? Over the course of 96 minutes. He killed 14 people and wounded 31 others before being shot dead by the police. So 16 adults, an unborn child, and then the 16th victim died 35 years later from injuries they'd suffered.
They died from injuries they'd suffered?
Yeah. So it took a while to get them, but, you know, ultimately he killed 17 people.
Wow.
And it was something that was shocking. So Bogdanovich himself says that the first chunk of the film is essentially based on what actually happened with Charles Whitman. So the killing of the mother and the father, the mother and the wife,
yeah,
is pretty much what happens. So Bobby Thompson, when he does that's based on a kind of reality. And I find it shocking. I find it deeply disturbing because you've got this all-American lovely family. You're like, I mean, it feels like you're watching some sort of 1950s sitcom perfection.
Wash your hands, Daddy. We can eat right away.
That's the best news I've heard all day.
Hello, sir.
Hi, son. How's it going?
Okay. Hi, Mom.
Hello, dear. Come on, sit right down. Hi, Bobby.
Hi,
How have
honey.
you been?
Just washing my hands.
Oh, we were worried about you. You certainly came in quietly. We didn't hear the car or anything. Have you been home long?
Just got in.
Ah, that looks good. I didn't have time for lunch today.
Oh, Robert.
Well, before,
We thank you for the food we're about to receive on the Lord's name.
And all their pastel colors and all their appliances, and look, there's the meatloaf out on the table. They're going to have dinner together, and then you've also got the guns, because Americans love their guns. I mean, I'm stereotyping because I have plenty of American friends who don't love guns at all. But then suddenly it's just like out of nowhere, he goes on a rampage.
I thought it was weird the way he called his dad Sir.
Yeah, I think that's just a sort of southern states kind of.
Yes,
He's
sir.
not southern states though, is he? He's
I think it's just
California.
It's kind of its era, isn't
Yeah.
it? That kind of
Well,
deferential respect.
I mean, if he's military as well, if he's ex-military, they'll be taught that respect for your elders. I mean, I find it weirder that him and his wife are living with his mum and his dad. I find that more strange than the Sir thing. But then I guess that's also like was part of the time, you know. It does happen. You see it in lots of films and TV shows, and I'm assuming they represent part of what goes on.
I loved that the wife says to the mom, "Can I borrow your car?" And she says, "Yeah, the keys are in the ignition."
That wouldn't happen in LA today.
In fact, I did notice that the only car that's locked, you actually see him carefully locking and unlocking the boot where his guns are stored.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was quite a nice touch, actually.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
locks-
apparently, yeah,
he
you
locks
just
everything.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But only if you got guns, apparently. Otherwise,
Well, I mean, it's clearly a premeditated act as well.
In as much as it is, and as I think, yeah, it's kind of it's premeditated in as much as once he snaps, he knows he's just going to go out and kill a lot of people. But I think the snap is never actually inevitable until it is.
No, because he does actually ask. He mentions wanting to have a conversation that he doesn't get.
Mm.
I want to talk to you, Eileen.
What about?
I don't know what's happening to me.
Why?
I get funny ideas.
Like what? Oh, you mean like that I shouldn't go to work tonight? Does this run look too bad?
And I felt that was recognizable as somebody's kind of moment of reaching out where they're having a difficulty. Which isn't to guilt somebody if you don't respond to somebody who's having a difficult moment, because we've all got lives and sometimes we can't.
Though he gets that positive reinforcement from his wife, you could do anything you put your mind to.
Mm-hmm.
You don't think I can do anything, do you?
What? I think you can do anything you want to if you put your mind to it. I don't know what Mother says. Anyway.
So obviously he's like, I'm a failure. I can't go, go ahead with pulling the trigger here. And then his wife, obviously he doesn't say that, but his wife says, no, you can do anything you put your mind to. And then once she goes out to work, he goes out to the car, grabs the gun. He's already made up his mind because he's been told that, he can do this if he puts his mind to it.
So inadvertently she has reassured him that actually the horrible thing that he thinks he's going to do, he is capable of doing.
Yeah.
Rather than sort of like, you can go off and do a better job sort of thing.
I totally missed that. That's really, really interesting. Because I was thinking, yes, we can see that this is a man stretched, sort of really, really tight, just about to snap.
Mm-hmm.
But he's presenting such a great front that I think everybody around him is quite justified in not picking up the fact that he's about to commit mass murder, because he's walking around with a great big smile on his face, and even when he says, I need to talk to you about something, there's no sort of sense of great sort of impending doom about it. It's just, he might very well be wanting to have a chat with her about what they're going to do that weekend from the way he approaches it with her. I don't honestly think one could fault the family for not seeing that coming, because he's not necessarily presenting this image of somebody who is in crisis until the very moment when he is clearly just gone.
I mean, there's unsurprisingly, I guess, we've come back down to another mental health issue on this on our show. There is definitely elements of that, and in some respects it seems quite ahead of its time in its awareness that even though it's not made explicit, I think we're probably meant to draw more out of the war experience than we are out of his unstable mind. But there's a correlation there, but there is another element.
See, I never picked up on the whole war thing.
No,
it's quite subtle, and I think from memory the only reference I got to it was the photo, which didn't,
like,
to be fair, look that like him.
I remember the photo, but I thought that was a picture of his dad. Like, I thought that's why there was guns everywhere, and
so did I, to be fair.
I thought he was like, his behavior at the start is just really bizarre.
I mean, the way it's geared up is obviously he puts Karloff in his sights pretty early on.
Yeah.
And the assumption is that, I mean, my assumption, even watching it again, like I've seen this multiple times, was that he is targeting Karloff from the off. That is the whole intention.
I thought he was going to kill him at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, so did I.
I thought that's how the movie was going to end.
Well, let us get to that in a second, because I do want to talk about that confrontation. So you have that, and then there's the incident with his father, where he lines his father up in his sights, and then pretends that, oh, I was just fiddling with my sights. Oh, I'm such a dick.
Just checking the recalibrating the
Hmm.
elevation or whatever he said.
I mean, it's odd in a way that is it odd that the first violence that he perpetrates is on women? I mean, like, he literally goes for the most vulnerable people, I guess, in his house, rather than his father.
Yeah, Dad gets
who-
away.
And yet, there's also something quite odd because he lines his father up for a killing. I mean, he looks like he's contemplating it at a point where his father would be similarly unable to defend himself. It's an odd choice, but then I suppose if you're basing this entirely on the truth of the story, which was that the guy went and killed his mum and his wife and then put them back into bed and tucked them up, sort of as Bogdanovich says, he buries them in their beds. Like, that's an intimacy and a kind of a tenderness almost, in an act of pure psychopathy.
It's weird.
It's uncomfortable.
It is weird.
I find it really uncomfortable, and for years after this, I like, see, if I ever goes past one of those kind of silo things, I feel uneasy.
Yeah.
Because I expected to be someone up there shooting down at me, and it, like, coming from Northern Ireland, I mean, like, and being a child of the 80s, there was kind of a fear of somebody shooting you randomly anyway, because that happened here.
And yet you wanted to screen this as a drive-in.
I think it'd be brilliant as a drive-in movie.
It would, yeah. I'm just saying, you're trying to inflict your nightmares upon others, though.
Yeah, a little bit. Well, I mean, there's another element to this film, is that Peter Bogdanovich does this thing where across his films he seems to constantly be paying homage to film history. And here we have a drive-in movie theatre, which is itself, culturally, it's something that here in the UK we don't really get. Drive-in movie theatres here, whenever those sorts of screenings are set up, do not run like a drive-in movie theatre does.
They would work so well in this current situation.
Wouldn't they? Yeah, I would absolutely.
Everyone
love
would
that.
be able to go to the movies and watch a movie if we had a proper drive-in.
Yep.
Without the worry of getting a nasty illness.
Well, I mean, you see how they. I mean, what I love is this is almost like a documentary of a form of culture that we have lost.
Or even the way the film works and how the guy like changes the reel. The wee bell goes off and he's I need to change to the other reel here.
That's the real projectionist who appears in the film as the projectionist.
Yeah.
But there's also a big kind of cultural history moment there as well, because the drive-in is kind of instrumental in rescuing Hollywood cinema after the audience disappears in the 50s.
Yeah. It's
because it wasn't television, and Hollywood decided it was television was causing the issues, and it wasn't. It was that the sort of migration out of the city had happened, and drive-ins were convenient if you lived in the suburbs and you had kids. So there's a cultural moment here being referenced as well, and I don't know how visible that was at the end of the 1960s, because it was still very much in motion. But
I mean, from my understanding, the drive-ins at this point were already starting to
decline.
Yeah, there was a movement. I mean, drive-ins were big in the States. They were also big in Australia.
I went to a drive-in in Australia, and it was brilliant.
Was it like that? Did it have the cambers on the like? Because this is one of the things I noticed is, like, a drive-in movie here, they'll stick you in a field or a car park, and you're all on the same level. But if you look, all the cars are angled.
So it's like an amphitheater, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was all on the level here, but you tuned in. You tuned into the radio. And
tuned in the radio.
Yeah, it was great. And then you sat in the back with your duvet, and you had your popcorn, and it was fantastic. So the
cool.
Incredibles on a drive-in on the Gold Coast of Australia. Loved it.
I mean, I would love to go to a proper drive-in. I've never been to one, but I would like to do a traditional kind of proper drive-in movie theater that has, I don't know if any of them are still around from the 50s and 60s. There's bound to be a couple.
I wouldn't have thought so.
But it is a whole different way of a cinematic experience.
Yeah.
And the scale of it is so vast. I mean, you go into a theater today and you've got something that's a bit like a house. in a room, and that's quite big. But you look at that screen is ginormous. And then you look at the car park. There are those glorious overhead shots. And
At
that
the
is
end of the movie, sure, as well, you know,
That
when you just see that
closing-
lone car.
That is amazing. Wow,
And-
it's amazing.
And then all the oil spots on where every single car is leaking oil.
But you got this notion where Karloff's going to do an in-person appearance, and he beats this tiny figure, like on this tiny stage in front of this vast screen. It's such a strange other form of life, and it seems so alien, and it is this very precise kind of moment. And I think that's one of the lovely things about this. I mean, the footage that they have of them setting up for the cinema is real footage that they shot in a test shoot. Like, this wasn't stuff that they shot specifically for. They went out, did a test shoot to see how it looked, and they used the footage because, again, it was the economy of a Roger Corman production. It's like, we've shot some film, we're going to stick it in.
Well,
There's
we're
no
not going to
point
shoot it
wasting anything.
twice. That's twice the amount of film.
We don't need lights. Let's just use what we've got, natural lighting, and it has a different kind of feel to it. But it works so well.
Yeah, I see that whenever the natural light fades, like you could really see that your man's struggling. Whenever he's doing the shooting, you know, you can't see anybody because it's so dark.
It's so dark. I think we probably do need to touch on that final kind of conclusion-y moment with the bringing together of the two narratives. So Karloff's second day on set.
His second 10-minute.
Like, I mean, I love how much they got out of him. I love that sequence with him and Peter Bogdanovich getting drunk in the hotel room and just kind of doing it. I love that interplay between the two of them. You know, where he wakes up and the first thing I wake up and the first thing I see is Baron Orlok. It's terrifying. And then Karloff sees himself in the mirror
And and jumps, yeah.
It's like, this is so lovely, and it's just like such a nice moment because I think that people had a perception of Karloff as well as a performer.
I certainly did.
No one's afraid of a painted monster.
The only thing you've said that's right is about this. Which is why you ought to do my movie. Oh, you don't play some phony Victorian heavy. You play a human being, and you could play the hell out of it.
He is very capable of doing very serious straight drama as well as the horrors and the shocks, but also he has a lovely comedic touch, which, you know, he had used in a number of films with like Vincent Price, Basil Rathbone, and Peter Lorre in recent years. But then there's that final confrontation, that final kind of moment of that's the horror moment, really, isn't it?
Yes, but it's also like the new wave moment, isn't it? It's also the look how much I know about film moment, and look how much I know about how to construct film, and look how much I know about how to make points with film, and look how much I know about how to make artifice. And it's just demanding that you engage with the film as a film. It's just glorious.
Somebody's drunk.
Careful.
Roll your window down! There's a sniper in here!
The last scene, whenever
that very last scene, that whole sequence in the drive-in movie theater, that conclusion to the chaos.
I was expecting your man to get gunned down by the police instead of
Beaten up by an old man with a cane.
getting slapped about. You silly little boy!
How dare you?
How dare you!
It's a very English way of
At
doing it,
one of
isn't
my movies?
Put
No.
you over my knee, young man.
Yes. I didn't. Whenever I was watching it, I didn't quite get to hear what he says. Because your man ends up cowering in the corner, all closed up. Like, what does your man say?
That what I was afraid of.
What does that mean?
Because there's the point early on where he's Orlok.
Oh, is that in reference to I'm only going to be the scary monster thing that he was saying.
He's talking earlier on. He says, that he's outdated, he's an antique, he's out of place, out of time, and then he shows the newspapers and says this is the real horror, and they're looking at stuff in the newspaper about what's going on and Vietnam and guns, and like he's scared of that. He says that's the horror, and then he comes into the situation, and your man is busy shooting away, and obviously he has no idea at first that that literally people are being gunned down around him, and then it's pointed out that then he sees the guys going off with a gun, and against any sensible person's instinct, completely unarmed. I mean, you have a whole crowd of vigilantes there, and Orlok Karloff walks forward just with a stick, which is there to support his weight. It's not actually a weapon. That is his means of conveyance. And he goes forward, and it's that confrontation. Is like he is scared of being out of place because there is this new terror, there is this new thing, and the form of that new terror is this child. Basically, it's this silly little man, this barely an adolescent, who is himself terrified, because in that moment, I mean, you see his look as he darts between seeing Karloff coming towards him as a real physical creature and Karloff up on screen also advancing towards him, and it's in this weird moment where I think like the reality of the situation becomes blurred. I may even hazard to say, Ben, like he feels like he is caught in the Matrix in this moment.
Right. Okay.
I mean, in modern parlance, that's what it is, though, isn't it? It's like there's a glitch.
See what I don't get there? Like, it's like, how do you mistake a 30-foot, whatever, tall screen figure for a real person? Like, he shoots at the screen.
I think that the thing that about that is he has dealt with all his killings apart from his wife and his mum. But a lot of his killings have been done through the long lens of a rifle. So everything has been at a distance through a screen. And probably like a lot of the killing he may or may not have done in wartime would have been at a distance and removed.
The guy he killed,
apart from the house at the start.
And the guy who works at the oil tanker.
Yes.
Because he gets startled and then he shoots him and then runs off.
But they're people he doesn't... See, I can't even say the people he doesn't know because obviously he knows his wife and his
and the grocery boy.
There is something. I think there is something different about that. But if you take this as you're a person, right, who grows up and this is somebody who embodies on-screen horror, and for you that's the person that would have terrified you going to the films as a kid, right? Yeah. So you've grown up with this as being a figure of horror.
Mm-hmm.
There is still a disconnect between seeing them there and then seeing them in the flesh. I don't know if you've ever met any kind of celebrity actors. I find there's a disconnect.
Well, obviously I've met some celebrities, actors, and I've been like, wow, you're small.
We'll not talk about Kit Harington.
But there is even some of them other ones. But I suppose
there is. I mean, it's different, I guess, if you're working with them and then you see their work after. But if you've gone the other way around,
yeah.
Like I remember the first time I encountered Tom Baker, and being very, even though I knew everything else, like always seeing him on screen and then seeing him in the flesh, there is a sudden like this is not right.
Mm.
I mean, Rachel, it's probably the same for you seeing Attenborough.
No, I've got to say, he was exactly who I thought and expected. Only just every bit as gentle and lovely as one would expect of his reputation.
Oh, I don't know. I guess I was hoping that between us we might actually be able to tease that one out. Who knows then why he takes the reaction he does? He's just a bit freaked out in that moment. I think probably because he's run out of bullets.
And he's not. His mind is not in a sane place.
I suppose he went into like real frantic mode.
Yeah.
At the end, oh no, I've dropped all my bullets. I'm trying to reach for them. I can't get them, and all I have is this one pistol left in my army bag. That has any ammo in it.
I just took it like reality was not his friend by this point.
No, I don't think so.
So completely.
He reverts though. I mean that final thing of him fetal like is him reverting back to a childhood state.
But then whenever he gets picked up and chained, like he doesn't show any. It's just bizarre, that behavior.
There's also,
and then whenever he gets cuffed and taken away by the police, like that childlike thing to the confidence or whatever he has whenever he's being taken off by the police it's very different.
I really don't know what to think about it. I think it's one that it's worth positing after watching the film and kind of just mulling over about how you feel about that character, about what's going on with him.
Arguing about it on Twitter.
The one other thing I wanted just to very, very briefly mention, because I've been on a bit of a Peter Bogdanovich binge over the last week, is it really strikes me his use of music in the films is quite distinctive. And I don't know if either of you have picked up on it.
I'm going to leave this one to my learned colleague because I never pick up on music stuff ever.
I only really noticed the whole music thing anytime your mom was driving around in the car listening to the radio.
That's the point. It
then I did notice then. Oh, nice one.
The score in this film and in most of Bogdanovich's films that I've seen so far is entirely diegetic. That means it is only the sounds that you hear within the world of the film.
I was reading that about the Last Picture House, or the Last Picture Show.
Last Picture Show,
yeah, which I haven't seen.
I watched it the other night and it's brilliant, but it is entirely diegetic. It means that like everything you hear is only what the characters will hear, which I think adds to.
That makes sense. That makes sense, even with the whole like TV thing, because the TV's blaring and then he walks into the other room, TV gets quieter.
Yep.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Thinking about that, yeah.
So I mean, just as something to think about. So if you happen to watch this film again, it's something just to kind of be aware of, because I think it makes everything seem so much more realistic, and to me adds to the horror, because the Karloff films would have been score the whole way through, whereas this, it's not. I mean, no matter how much there's actually still quite a bit of music here, but it's entirely what he's experiencing. It's not what we are. It
comes down to, well, the perception, whether conscious or not, of being manipulated emotionally by the musical. I mean, you're every bit as manipulated emotionally by the diegetic music, because that's always a decision. It's not there by accident. And I'd be amazed if all of that was actually diegetic and not sort of layered over in post, because it's used strategically.
It may be layered on in post, but it is understood as diegetic.
Yes, no, that I agree with you. Yes, I agree with you. But it's sort of giving the impression that, we just happen to be tuned to this radio station at this particular time. We've no control over what happened. Whereas you have complete control over what's playing, and it is still very manipulative.
Absolutely. Like the whole shoot at the tower thing, I mean, was done mute. They didn't record any sound on that. That's all post-production sound.
Yeah.
Because it was cheaper.
Well, I'm sort of talking about like the artifice, the buying into the whole, this is definitely more naturalistic, quote unquote, because we haven't layered on any non-diegetic music. We're not manipulating your emotions in the same way, whereas actually, yeah, you are. You're total liars. You were definitely manipulating our emotions. You're just being really, really underhanded about it.
Oh no, I mean, I actually think it gives it a sense of unease. I mean, for me, it really enhances the mood that I have when I experience the film is by having that diegetically rather than sort of an overt score.
Fun game you can play with your friends while watching movies is what I like to play with students, called diegetic or non-diegetic. Hours of fun with that. Students loved it when I played that with them.
I'm not sure Ben's convinced by that one.
No.
They Folks, did not love that game.
I'm going to wrap this one up here because I think we've had a pretty decent natter about Peter Bogdanovich's Targets, and I'm glad the two of you actually seem to like it, because
it was a cool movie. Yeah.
I'm always filled with trepidation when I fire you suggestions through.
As you should be.
You come back and go, it's shit, Bob. Why are you making us watch that?
I made you guys watch The Room, so I can say nothing.
This is true. I thought we'd get through a week without mentioning that film, but
don't watch
Here to
that
remind
movie.
you. Do watch that movie, it's great.
Thank you very much, Ben and Rachel.
No problem.
Thank you.
I'll post social media links and stuff for the relevant things on our sleeve notes, which will be on our website, www.cinepunked.com. Do follow us on our socials. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, and we're also on YouTube. So find us in all those places. Give us a follow, give us a like. If you enjoyed this podcast and you've listened to it for the first time, any of our shows at all, and you like it, hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you're on, and do listen again, and tell your friends and family and all sorts of people that like films that we exist, and we'll be back in your ears very, very soon. And apart from anything else, go and watch Targets. It's available via streaming services at the moment. It'll be available on Blu-ray later on in the year in the UK, and there's always other Bogdanovich films to explore as well. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, there should be a pin spot to where I sit on my face as I'm talking. Ladies and gentlemen, I've devised a torture test between your lighter and my Ronson comet. Put your thumb on the side of your lighter. Squeeze the light out of it. The Ronson comet can. Find a dangerous, windy place and see if your flame will blow out. The Ronson comet won't. Now, twist its neck and see if your lighter carries 2 spare flints and a replaceable spark wheel. The Ronson comet does. Carefully turn out the lights and adjust your flame to cigarette, cigar, and pipe. Now try to inject your lighter with life-giving butane. 1 gulp from the Ronson multi-pill and the comet can light for months. If your lighter can't do half the things the Ronson comet can, get one and have your own torture test.